Welcome, everybody. This is a Q&A pre-bid session for the RFP that we issued to solicit services from a consultant or contractor to undertake our Black Historic Site Survey in Washington State. This is money that we were awarded from the National Park Service through a competitive grant program that we applied to and were awarded funding through their Underrepresented Communities grant. We have received 3 rounds of funding in the past, 2 rounds for 2 separate phases of a survey of Latino American sites throughout the state. And then most recently, something that we're currently working on, a survey of Filipino American sites in the state of Washington. So this being our 4th rounding, we're very excited to undertake this effort to discover more information about sites throughout Washington state that are significant and associated to Black creators. And we use that term hopefully broadly enough to find individuals and the work that represents them, thinking about architects, engineers, builders, and anybody that's done a physical contribution. We had to start somewhere, I'd say, with understanding a little bit more or a lot more about Black history in Washington state. And so this was our first attempt at that. And we believe that this will be a catalyst for additional work down the road too, which is why we've written into the RFP a pretty robust amount of information about stakeholder outreach and really gathering information from what could be hidden figures that we hope to not have hidden anymore. So I'm going to introduce myself as well as my colleague, and then we can go through the RFP and then open up for questions along the way. So my name is Nicholas Fan. I'm the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer for the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. And with me on the call is our Grants and Fiscal Manager, Maravik. You want to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Maravik Quintanilla, and I am the Grants Manager and Fiscal Analyst for Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation.
So thank you all for joining us. And I'm going to share my screen here. So we don't have to be in the Hollywood squares for much longer if you don't want to. So hopefully you can see my screen here. Are you looking at PDF for the RFP? Is that what you see? Okay, see some head nods, great. So we opened up the application period for a pretty long amount of time. And I'll say right off the bat that one of the intentions of that is that we recognize that, it might take individual firms or individuals or building a team a little bit of time to work some of those things out. So as you're building your team, whether you're proposing it as a firm, we want to make sure that you're clear on the expectations for the project. But if you also have to do some outreach and coordinating and partnership as well, that you have the ability and the time to be able to do that. So that's why we have it open for 2 months. Submissions are due on December 15th, just before the strike of midnight. So hopefully you still have a few weeks to be able to gather information necessary for the proposal and to be able to respond accordingly. We plan on evaluating the proposals after the holiday break at the beginning of January. And so we don't anticipate being able to award a contract and get under contract with the successful bidder until the beginning of January or beginning of February, excuse me. And that should still give us sufficient amount of time to be able to conduct the grant deliverables and everything that goes along with it, because the period of performance won't end until September 30th of 2023. So that gives you many months, about a little over a year and a half to be able to complete the work. Intro and background. We are essentially looking for research and public outreach. So as I said at the beginning, we're intending one of the outcomes of this that's not written into the deliverables to be able to strengthen our relationship with the Black community, and also to empower the Black community to understand that they have a place in historic preservation programs, whether that's through National Register listings, through survey and inventory efforts, or just understanding the vast contributions that Black individuals have made on the built environment in Washington state. And so that's something that's harder to write in as a deliverable, obviously, but that is definitely an outcome that we were striving for. And I think all the work that we do associated with this grant-funded project, we hope will contribute to that long-term success. And we also know that once this grant-funded project is over, that this is just the beginning. It's the tip of the iceberg, and we will continue, working and developing on those relationships, on the information that we're gathering, and on the, formal recognition of significant sites in the state. But the actual deliverables that we're expecting include at least 5 biographies, and these are minimums. So, if you write into your proposal minimum, but you anticipate, based on your knowledge or your outreach, that you might be able to do more with the allotted grant funds, then we certainly welcome that. But we do have to meet a minimum as required by our grant contract with the Park Service. So hopefully it's not too onerous. We're looking for 5 biographies of individuals. We're looking for up to 10 historic property inventory forms that are associated with each of those individuals identified in the biographies. And ultimately, we want to land on 2 National Register nomination forms so that we can ultimately list, at least 2 of the projects or sites that we find through the survey effort to be listed on the National Register, which would increase our current representation on the National Register of sites associated with Black history by 200%, because there's currently one that's very woefully underrepresented. A little bit of history, given that context, even though we have just 1 site listed on the National Register, we're continually populating historic property inventory forms in our online database wizard with information and significance that are tied to Black and African American individuals. And I'll say that in the past, we hadn't always been so cognizant or thoughtful about intentionally including such references. And so there could be a number of things that are recorded that have significance to such individuals, but haven't actually been reflected in the narrative. And so when we find certain references or, can actually make a link, our staff tries to go in and make those updates accordingly. But it's very ad hoc. And so another reason for pursuing this funding was to increase that effort in a formal way, but also just so that we're constantly adding to and modifying the information as we find it through the various number of project reviews that we undertake as an agency. The list that ensues after that is by no means exhaustive. It is what we were able to come up with through our own collective knowledge, which I will admit is very limited, and also through a study that Esther Mumford did for the agency in 1985, where she did a little bit of a context statement for Black history in Washington state. And obviously, there's been many years that have passed since 1985, and so we're in need of an update on that. But that's where most of these names derive. So it's by no means an exhaustive list. It's not prescriptive either, but we felt like it was a good starting point to give you, and also the reviewers who are reviewing our grant proposal with Park Service, a flavor of what we know and expect could be out there. Objective, again, aside from doing the deliverables, is also to conduct extensive outreach. And we'd love to be involved in that to the greatest extent possible. But our expectation is also that a successful proposer is going to have some connections and relationships that they've already built with key stakeholders in the Black community already. And I think that's reflected in throughout the RFP, but if it's not, please let me know if that's not clear. And it's not to say that if you don't have existing relationships that they can't be cultivated, because this is certainly where we are starting with as well. So minimum qualifications, we expect this to be represented by individuals on the team that you're putting together. It's not to say that every single person on the project team must meet all of these qualifications, but if you have at least one person that meets each of these qualifications, that we can pull together the right people with the right experience, and hopefully be able to assemble the right qualifications that we expect in order to complete the project. A lot of this includes some of the technical jargon, which we understand is a different skill set for an architectural historian than it might be for a public historian, for example. I imagine that there's going to be an amalgamation amongst the project team individuals that bring these different skill sets to the table. So as you read through those, let us know if you have any clarifying questions about them. Funding for the project, and I'll say that this middle sentence is a little bit misleading. There is $50,000 that's available. That's set in stone. We've been awarded the funding. It's secured. This project will be reimbursable for up to $50,000. There's also a requirement for $10,000 worth of match or in-kind, and so that can be cash or in-kind labor, and that can be derived from a number of sources as well, so make sure that's included in your budgets. As indicated at the beginning, I mentioned that the period of performance will go from when we get under contract around the beginning of February until the end of September 2023. There's some definitions in there. I am your contact if you have questions, and I am the person that you would be submitting your proposals to. Here's a procurement schedule reiterated from the top. We are currently in a pre-proposal conference, so thank you for coming. Some submission guidelines that are written here. Preference on the type of entity that's applying or submitting a proposal. It says no preference is given, and I'm not sure what the legal requirements are for that, but we certainly encourage participation of submissions by firms that are certified by the Office of Women and Minority-Owned Businesses. But I'll also say that you need not be certified by WOMB, but we do encourage participation in those submissions. So, and then some legalese, jargon. I won't feel like I need to bore you with. You can read them and take them literally. Proposal contents must include the following. It should have a one-page cover letter summarizing the contractor's interest, basically a cover sheet. Names, resumes, and other relevant qualifications of the individuals that are on your project team, including sub-consultants. A statement of your project approach and how you are addressing the scope of work and deliverables. An identification of stakeholder individuals and organizations. If you have already built relationships with stakeholders or organizations, it would be good to call those things out in your proposal. Include a schedule and a budget for completion as well, making sure it's adhering to these requirements. A proposed communications plan that includes how outreach will be conducted, and also how the findings and deliverables will be communicated at the end of the project. I think that it's great to do the project, obviously, but if we're not communicating what it means to the public, then it kind of renders itself moot and pointless. So I think that's an imperative component of the proposal, to make sure that we have a clear plan for communicating its findings, after they're done or throughout the project, et cetera. And this can be done in any number of ways. We're not being prescriptive, but we're just giving some options here. Story maps, social media posts, in-person events, hopefully. Virtual events if in-person events aren't possible, or hybrid events, videography, graphics, et cetera, et cetera. And lastly, if you include a sample of work or examples of other similar work that's been performed by any combination of the individuals on your project team, that would be also good to include in your proposal. Regarding the scope of work, this kind of goes into a little bit more detail of the deliverables that are identified above. So again, we're looking for a reconnaissance level of effort on the historic property inventory form. So it's an amount of information, but it's not, you know, a full-blown National Register nomination level of documentation. We do expect that there's some boots on the ground survey work that is done as part of those historic property inventory forms to give us a kind of almost up-to-date set of eyes on the condition and integrity of such properties. The nominations for the National Register of Historic Places must be done with by obtaining owner permission for the properties as well. So this has been a stumbling block in the past where we identify properties that have significance in the past, but you might have an uncooperative owner. So while it might be like a very significant property in terms of the study and survey that we're after, the owner consent issue might get in the way and preclude that particular site from actually being nominated to the National Register. So this is, I'd say, a dynamic conversation that we will have with the contractor, as we select which site will be nominated to the National Register as a result of this study. But also to understand, weighing relative significance, as identified through the study with whether or not there's actual ownership and control over that particular property. So 2 is kind of hard to ask in some cases, because if the ownership hasn't persisted over time, or there's no ability for anybody to influence the outcome of a particular property that we might find significant, that becomes a difficult path in order to successfully nominate said property. Or we find that there are places that are still, within control of the community, and obtaining owner permission is enthusiastically embraced. We definitely see it both ways. Conducting public outreach meetings, this is essentially to make sure that we're keeping community holders and stakeholders up to date, and the public up to date on the progress of the project and its findings. Drafts will be reviewed by the agency, not by myself, but by others on staff. So I envision a number of people from the Built Environment Unit, like Michael Hauser, Holly Bors, Kim Gant, Michelle Thompson, being able to review and comment on these things. But these work products are ultimately yours. Progress reports, I think the monthly basis is negotiable for sure, depending on your capacity. Products of communication would also be part of those deliverables, perhaps. Cost proposal, again, not to exceed $50,000, and that amount is definitely set. We will be reviewing and evaluating the proposals between the middle of December and the middle of January, and then we'll notify accordingly. There's a debriefing process as well if you submit a proposal and are not selected. And then there's also a protest procedure if you are not selected and would like to file a formal protest given these circumstances that may or may not apply. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and open it up for any of you that might have some questions.
Good morning, Nick and everyone. I just have a comment too, is that, at the Black Heritage Society, when Nick, thank you for coming to us early and asking about this opportunity or the project, just to talk about the project. We were really excited because for so long we've been keeping these short lists, of people and places and how significant they are in the community. And we understand that BHS, and since 1977, we've been collecting. Not so much until the last 3 years have we been out there and being serious advocates for the preservation work that we know is important. So we really look forward to this survey. And statewide, it kind of blows my mind because we have quite a bit, here just in King County. So I'm looking forward to seeing what consultant and team will be able to come up with. And I don't think there'll be too many, short lists. It's going to be a long list. I had one question, just really quickly, is that amongst the creators, you had a sample list of creators. So architects, designers, engineers, builders, and then you have artists. So that's pretty broad. What
it is
when you say artist?
And that was the broadest definition we could think of, because there's actually a separate civil rights grant pool of money that we do intend to pursue funding through as well. And so, and that's, I think that civil rights for the Black community and any BIPOC community, frankly, is so interwoven with some of the social history as well, that I imagine there will be some overlap with this. And so by, identifying, some prominent Black individuals, some creators, if you will, that it's going to lead from a research standpoint to other individuals and significant figures and places. And so that was one of the reasonings why we decided to, narrow the scope by identifying the people first, rather than this kind of broader definition of community, which can be a little bit nebulous. And I also think that the statewide approach opens the door to hidden figures that might not even be on anybody's radar or profile yet. And so, one of those examples, I think, was somebody that you and I discussed, Stephanie, was, some of the early Boeing engineers, and, how they might be hidden figures, and, not really on the radar, but fitting that definition of creator by virtue of being engineers and, creating things, not places necessarily. There might still be places that are associated with them. And whatever that association is, could have a social history connection to it. It could have a civil rights connection to it, or labor history connection. And so we think that it's a catalyst for further information that could be discovered in a later phase. So. Any other questions? Maybe I'll break the ice. How did you all hear about the RFP? What channels did you receive this through? You can feel free to unmute yourself or drop it in the chat. Just curious how our communications were. Former client, staff email list, excellent. Department of Neighborhoods, great. Work Seattle, okay, good. I think it worked to an extent. We had our own contact list that we had started compiling. We have our own communication channels as well, and we hope to, encourage others to spread it through their respective listservs too. So glad to know that it's spreading the way it is. Are there any questions about any of the contents or proposal questions that you might have?
It did bring up a question to mind, Nick, and thank you for your overview about this opportunity, which is very exciting. Like Stephanie, I also share in that excitement, and you know, as we see, there are many contenders to make this initial run of, you know, the 2 or more, which is very encouraging to see, and potentially build a pipeline that we can continue to build upon. My question relates to the communication strategy and the approach. So one of the pieces I saw in the RFP is about communication products and talking about social media posts and other means. So Nick, is that something that would be through the DAHP accounts, and then we would be working, you know, we would be working kind of in concert with DAHP on that, or how, if you could provide a bit more background, that would be very helpful.
Sure, it's all negotiable because we are essentially passing through the funding from Park Service. Whenever there's something that's publishable, the Park Service asks that they be acknowledged for providing the initial funding. So I'll say that. I think that in terms of promotional opportunities and continuing to build relationships, that I would encourage you know, cross-pollination on the postings and collaboration on, you know, when those communications go out. So if you're you know, a firm that's being you know, highlighting the work that you're doing and the exciting things that you're discovering through your research and outreach, that it's certainly encouraged that you're, you know, obviously promoting the information that you're finding. But we will also, you know, like the opportunity to either repost what you've posted or do a joint post of some kind, you know, if we're specifically talking about social media, so that we can ensure that I think people are feeling empowered that they have a place in preservation, and, you know, these places are being recognized. They can see others that are from their community that have made these contributions that are being recognized as well. So I'd say generally that's the scope of the communications, that it's all negotiable and up for a collaborative discussion once we get under contract. Other questions or clarifications? Okay, well, this is not your only opportunity. Obviously, I am available for answering questions, as is Maravik. I will make sure you have my email address in the chat. It also appears in the RFP itself. You can also Google me and find me pretty easily, I think. So if any of you have any follow-up questions after this session, please feel free to reach out, and we can talk through anything that you are seeking clarification on, or anything like that. So thank you all for attending. I really appreciate you taking your time. And with that, I will give you back 29 minutes of your own time.